Hello. In this video, I'd like to talk about the so-called found watch analogy used by Christians to prove the existence of a higher power, which they call God. And immediately from God, they jump to the Christian God and the Holy Trinity. And I think you probably heard of it. It's been repeated like mantra over the years, decades, and centuries. And it goes something like this and something to that effect. That if somebody was walking along a beach and found a watch, then it will be logically to conclude for him or her that this watch is a creation of somebody with a much more complex brain and consequently mind. In other words, that this watch is a direct result, did not naturally occur, and resulted from first being designed, and then this design was carried out or implemented, and whoever did that made or constructed a watch. Now, so far, so good. The Christians fail to distinguish between natural phenomena and natural occurrences and the ones that are performed by a human being. For example, I think it would not be suitable or prudent to say that God created this tree, since this tree evolved from, sometimes it could be hundreds of years from a seed. And then it took that tree hundreds or at least tens of years to grow up. But this putting aside, I want to go to the main argument. And I want to use the logic of the same Christians. And I totally agree with them in saying that, yes, such a watch, if you find it on a beach or somewhere on a rock, then it would be logical for you to conclude that it's made by somebody. Regardless of who it is, it's made by somebody. And this somebody, argue they, must have an extremely much more complex, and here the key word is complex, brain and mind. And the mind is a function of the brain. And there's no mind without a brain. There's no evidence that a mind can exist without a brain. And any functionings of the brain, including the thinking, can be explained by natural phenomena. But using the same kind of logic as the Christians do, with respect and with regards to the watch, I would argue the following. If it took, let's say in this case, an extremely very complex human brain to conceive, design, construct, implement, put into use such a complex watch, then yes, it logically follows that the brain that designed it and implemented it and put it to function is a way much more complex. And then they say, we look at God's creation and the universe and see how extremely very much more complex is than this watch. And then it logically follows that God made it. But then I would argue the following. If the structure of the universe, put simply, is so much more complex than a watch and then a human brain, because the human brains and the human species are part of all of the creation, which is very, very complex. And all of the functioning, the way the universe functions, is extremely very complex. Then it must have taken somebody with an extremely complex brain to design and create this universe. And I'm talking about quadrillions, if not quintillions or sextillions of times much more complex than the brain that designed the watch. And since the argument is that this watch cannot have just occurred there naturally, but must have been made or created by somebody, and that is a human being, then how much more complex would be a brain that constructed and created this entire universe? And according to the very same logic of the Christians and of the believers and of the religious people, according to their very same logic, not mine, this extremely mega giga tera complex brain that created the universe by necessarily needs to have a creator. In other words, God, by that very same Christian logic, needs by necessity to have a creator, because you can't just go and bump into such a complex creation like the universe and like our world and not conclude that since it's so complex, then it must have been created by somebody. And this somebody must have an extremely much more quadrillion and quintillion and sextillion times more complex brain. And then I would argue again, and I would repeat that this quintillion or quadrillion more times complex brain that created our universe and our world, since it's so complex, it just cannot be that it just exists like this or has occurred by natural phenomena. There must be somebody who created this person that created the universe. And there must be another higher God, so to speak, that created God who created the universe. And this ad infinitum. In other words, this higher God then is way much more complex than the Christian God. And then this higher God, so to speak, also must have a creator who is way much more complex than this higher God. And this is the higher God. And so, like I said, we go to ad infinitum. But the main point I'm trying to make is that if you argue that a watch cannot just occur like this, but must be made by somebody with a complex brain, and that complexity is a sign of intelligence, then how much more complex is God's brain? And therefore, since it's a sign of intelligence, then there must be by necessity somebody who created God. Thank you.